We're live. Oh, great. Well, welcome back. I think it's 4 o'clock. Welcome back to our Thursday wine talk. It's this is becoming quite enjoyable to sort of get out of the house and see people in some fashion. And we're happy to be back and see all you, or at least imagine you seeing us. That's almost as good. So tonight we have the regular crew of Megs Goodwin, our assistant winemaker, and Kelby Russell, our winemaker, and Heather, our, what are you, social media and front of house manager? She's pretty
Wait
slow
and
front of
have
house
it.
these days, but doing everything else. And Rebecca, our brand ambassador. And our special guest tonight is Tony Damiani, owner and vineyardist at Glacier Ridge Vineyards. So good to have you with us, Tony.
Good to be here.
All right. So tonight, in addition to chatting about Glacier Ridge, we have a Glacier Ridge wine that we are going to be enjoying, and I actually hadn't had a sip yet. So if you'll excuse me just 1 minute, I think we've all opened up this 2016 Glacier Ridge Cabernet Franc, and welcome to Thursday Wine Talk.
That's the Pinot.
That's beautiful. So I think tonight we're going to kick it off with Kelby and Megs over there, who were the feet on the floor in the cellar for this one in 2016. And why don't you give us kind of an overview of what we're looking at, what we're tasting, and we'll go from there.
Sure. I mean, 16, kind of a landmark vintage. I mean, all of them are very particular to us, but 16 was so hot and so dry. It was really an outlier. You know, we've had hot years in the past. We haven't seen years that had drought stress before. That made things a little more difficult for Tony, I'm sure. Made things a little different for us in the cellar with when the fruit was coming in, but also with the reds in particular, how beautiful the fruit was. I mean, you can't ask for too much of better conditions for really ripe, beautiful red wines. And, you know, Glacier Ridge, the wines kind of make themselves. You know, I mean, we do a lot of work to get them there, but when you have fruit that looks as beautiful as it does, we don't have to do a ton to bring the final product home. I was taking a quick look at the notes from this because all the years blurred together for me.
Hey, at least
this was,
It only gets worse.
That's what I was thinking.
it's true.
This year, the 16 vintage, we had about somewhere between 25 and 50% of the stems were included. We would not necessarily call that whole cluster. That's sometimes when people say whole cluster, they are referring to the berries not being crushed, as well as the inclusion of stems, which gives a particular sort of like fruity lift to a wine. But for the Glacier Ridge wines, we really like the fruit to just express itself as is. So even if we include the stems, we still crush the berries so that everything gets mushed together and the juice can flow around. But this got a little bit of whole clusters there. That gives you some nice tannin, some nice grip. Got a nice cold soak for a few days. Pretty stock standard winemaking from there. 1 ton bins punched down by hand. Malolactic in the bin, basket pressed off. So our beautiful wooden basket press, and then barreled down for, you know, until the next summer when it got bottled up with just a little bit of filtration. But it's just a beautiful expression of the grape in that vintage. And, you know, I'm loving tasting it.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit, fill us in about Glacier Ridge Vineyards a little bit.
Sure. I was going to say I think we talked about it last time, but we planted the first block of grapes in 99. And that's the lower block, which is, you know, producing what we're drinking right now. And that was a pretty dense woods before it was planted. So we cleared it, and we did a lot of ripping of the soil. And it turned out actually to be a lot deeper than the soil chart said it was. So we were a little surprised by that. It's I think, as we said, it's not overly productive, but it's really produces some unique grapes that produce unique wines. It's probably more like 5 or 6 foot to bedrock there, whereas the soil charts say it's like 40 inches. So that was a pleasant surprise. That was the first planting. And of course, that was under the Damiani Vineyards sort of block. And then we planted the block above that. And then in 2014, I planted the vineyard above my house, which I guess we haven't really, this year, maybe this coming year, maybe we'll see the first crop from it, Kelby.
Yeah, that's about right.
So that's a little bit about the vineyard. I have a full-time job that I work at Cornell. So doing this has always been a bit of a challenge because it's hard to have 2 jobs. And it's also hard to find labor and people who will work in vineyards. It's always been a challenge. So luckily, the vines take care of themselves most of the time. And we try to do the basics and get out of their way. Sort of our philosophy of taking care of the vineyard. I look at what other vineyard owners do around here, and I don't think I do anything that unique other than I really try to avoid the use of herbicides, which I believe alter the soil chemistry over time. So if you're going to ask me what's the one thing I do different, it's probably that. So.
That's really pretty wine. It's in comparison to the like the 2012. Well, we were tasting Merlot the other day, but I've always noticed there's a real common thread of kind of vineyard expression between the Cabernet Franc and the Merlot, both in that lower block. Now, did you plant the Cab Franc and the Merlot in the lower block in the same year, or were they different years?
They were the same year. They were both planted in '99, and unfortunately, we only planted 1.25 acres of Cab Franc, which I know Heather would have wanted more.
Yes, indeed, always. What I've always loved about Glacier Ridge's Cabernet Franc is if I close my eyes, I am very, very hard pressed to tell the difference between the Cabernet Franc that's coming from Glacier Ridge and the Cabernet Francs that I was exposed to when I lived in Budapest, where up in those Edgeri Hills, Cabernet Franc is king. I mean, it's the component to bull's blood. They just add token amounts of other stuff to it to kind of balance it out sometimes. But when you're talking about big old style Cab Franc produced in the Hungarian style, I mean, this just dials right into it. And there's no getting around it. It does. It has that kind of hint of smokiness and earthiness to it that I just always love.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've always really liked about the Cabernet Francs from Glacier Ridge and this particular style in general is that right now you really see that there's quite a bit of like grippy tannins still going on right now. It feels like a very, very young wine to me, but it still has quite a bit of freshness to it that's being brought by some of the acidity that comes with Cabernet Franc. And to me, it really just showcases how much life that this wine has and how long it's going to be able to kind of keep progressing and keep evolving and keep, becoming more than it is even now.
So is the farm fully planted there at Glacier Ridge, Tony, or is there more to do?
It's not fully planted. There's certainly, as I said to Heather the other day, actually the best soil is not planted, or the Valois soil, which is below the Merlot block, is technically the best soil, but it's also about like that kind of an angle. So it's always been a little off-putting to go down that slope and think about planting. But it's not all planted. And up in the new block, I think there's room for another 2.5 acres down to about where my house is. So a little bit more room, not a lot. It's it's definitely not a huge vineyard, but it has a little bit more room left. I just need to get more ambition to do that part, you know. It's a lot
Well,
of
now, don't you find that each year that goes by, you get more and more energetic and feel more and more vigor and strength?
um, well, no. I peaked somewhere a few years ago, I think. Yeah, I'm on the other side of the curve now. So, didn't you talk about it like golden years or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
Can always hope my son will do it, but he doesn't. I don't think it's his thing. So,
well, I'm curious too, because this, Kelby, maybe you can tell me a little bit about, I think your winemaking approach to this vineyard is a little bit different than mine maybe was in the early years. Can you talk about some of the factors and some of the decisions and strategies that maybe have evolved for you over the past few years working with the fruit?
Yeah, I mean, we had the big one that I think of is that we had a few years where, in including more stems, we had a little bit more of the whole cluster character that I mentioned earlier. And it made beautiful wines, but to me, that whole cluster character masked some of the Glacier Ridge expression, some of the terroir. And I think probably with age in the bottle, you know, those characters would have matured and the Glacier Ridge side would have come out, but it just didn't feel quite right. And those were kind of in response to a couple of cooler years in 13 and 14, where finding ways to bring out the structure, that's what led us to the whole cluster idea, to get more tannin in. What has evolved since then is even from this vintage, from 16 onward, we have more stems included in our ferments. We have longer time on skin and stems because the stems are just really ripe and really beautiful looking from this site. So we can get away with leaving the wine at that point in contact with the stems and skins for a few extra weeks even. This usually gets pressed out like the week before Christmas. And then this wine, I would say the oak profile has changed a little bit. We've had access to some different cooperages for barrels and some different used oak. Not old oak, but you know, oak that maybe the first or second use has already happened on it, and that seems to really suit this Cabernet Franc quite nicely. I think going forward, we've actually started to bring in. This is really forecasting into the future, but we've started to bring in some double barrels of brand new oak. And obviously, if you have a double barrel, twice the volume, but you don't have twice the surface area, so it's actually a really nice marriage between the oak quality, even in a brand new barrel, and what is appropriate for a Cabernet Franc like this.
Kelby, about how much of this wine did you make in this vintage?
Maybe 100 cases, if that.
100?
There's just never enough Cab Franc.
No, and the Glacier Ridge bottling year after year tends to be, I can pull that up, tends to be relatively even, but also notably low. I mean, we think of Cab Franc, generally speaking, right? Cab Franc is a really vigorous grower, has a lot of crop, sometimes too much crop, sometimes too much green growth. I mean, I'm sure Tony can grumble about that for sure. But this site just doesn't really deliver that sort of excessive vigor in the same way. So yeah, I just looked it up. We had 94 cases of this, so that's roughly 4 barrels, and that included a little bit of Merlot from Glacier Ridge blended in, and a little bit of Cabernet Sauvignon, because there was I think 300 pounds of it is what I saw in the notes. So not enough of it to make its own wine, but it came in and we put it right in one of the fermenters, and it, Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc work together very nicely. So.
And
One thing I note about the Cab Franc, it is a much lower vigor than what you normally expect with Cab Franc, and the clusters in particular are very loose in this clone varietal. So I think that in a way takes care of the health of them a lot, because the clusters are so loose that they're less, less disease, less problems, but also less quantity. So
Compared to Pinot Noir, the clusters, is that what you're?
Well, compared to any other grape we have, but certainly Pinot Noir is the other end of the universe, where the clusters are so
Very
tight that you wish that somebody would do something about it. But yeah, it's the other end where the clusters have plenty of space, like everyone's got enough room on that bunch. Pinot Noir, they're all like pushing to escape.
Yeah, it's but that's true. Compared to the other Cab Franc we work with from other points around the lake, or have seen or encountered, these clusters are always just really open, really loose. And again, kind of low in yield, right? Like the clusters aren't absolutely chocked full of grapes like some other Cab Franc vineyards might be.
Yeah.
I think we should also kind of note real quick, just from a grape processing standpoint, that Tony is very brave, and these are handpicked clusters, and they are driven up to Red Newt from Glacier Ridge via tractor on 4/14 in October, which is a very busy time of year, and he's a very brave man for having done that year after year.
Yeah, and that's when Dave said, where's the energy? I was like thinking of that last fall as I was driving up there, and it seems like each year it gets worse with the people who feel like they have to get with as close to your tractor as possible as they pass. It's like, ah!
Don't touch the grapes.
Or me.
Or you. Yes, exactly.
PSA here, people. If you see grapes being transported in the Finger Lakes in October, give them a wide berth. That's how they're making the wine that you are so going to enjoy.
You don't want to risk wiping out the very crop that you're desiring to buy a few months later.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're in a no passing zone, it means you can't pass a tractor either. It's still a vehicle on the road. Like that's this is like agriculture 101 here, but you can go 20 miles an hour for a few minutes. It's not going to hurt you.
Correct. So much flavor, so much depth. Each sip, it's opening up more and more and more, which is really lovely. So.
But Dave is speaking. I can't hear him.
Oh, I know. I muted because a minute ago there was a pretty loud violin in the background.
Oh, we did hear that briefly.
But yeah, I was just saying it's been kind of a sketchy stream tonight. So I think we're back live again. I apologize to those folks who've been cutting in and out, and appreciate if you're still with us. But I think maybe I'm starting to think that this wine needs some food to go with it. I'm getting a little hungry. How about everybody else?
Very hungry.
Okay. So I don't know, Megs, what do you have on the docket for tonight to go with this beautiful 16 Cabernet Franc Glacier Ridge?
So my food pairing game has increased from last week. Ryan and I were given a duck a little while ago that has been residing in the freezer, and we pulled it out and have been thawing it. So I think I have roast duck this evening with my Cabernet Franc. I've got a cranberry chutney that I think I'm going to throw together with it as well.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Kelby?
I have one of my favorite pasta recipes on deck. It's a southern Italian recipe that is really fast and is kind of quirky. It's not something you hear of often. You make kind of like a paste of lardo and parsley and carrot and some garlic, And then that paste you can just store in your refrigerator for months, right? It was a way of preserving herbs and some fresh vegetables through the winter. And then the sauce is just a couple tablespoons of that, cooked quickly with some tomato paste and some chicken broth. And it is, I've already done the work of making this paste a few months ago, so dinner's ready in about the time it takes to boil the pasta. But it's just a fascinating flavor combination. Like, it's very hearty and savory, but also is kind of light and brothy. It's really a cool thing to have at hand in the fridge.
Yeah. What do you have in the kitchen tonight, Heather?
Well, bringing out one of my favorite Cab Francs means that there's a little bit of stew beef that I've been marinating in a little bit of a older red I had hanging around. So tonight it's gouache levache. So we're going to make good Hungarian beef stew. It's one that's, a nice little labor of love. I'm most likely going to set that aside and just eat the leftover salad from last night. And then tomorrow going to sit down with a really great Hungarian meal and get away the winter blues, because it just doesn't seem to stop snowing around here.
Yeah, it's snowing today.
Yeah.
Those were some big snowflakes earlier.
It was really pretty. It would have been even prettier if it was like December. How about you, Rebecca?
I'm having some lamb sliders tonight from the lamb came from a local farm here, JD Steele. And then I pickled up some red onions, Zuni Cafe's recipe, Judy Rogers pickled red onions, and I'm thawing out some brioche buns. Should be good.
Sounds great. What do you have going for tonight, Tony?
Well, I checked with the chef, and we're having a mushroom risotto and grilled asparagus.
Ooh.
That sounds really good. I may have just changed my dinner plans. Can I steal yours? Actually, I was thinking of some pork tonight. Maybe it's like a pork tenderloin, and I'm thinking slice it into kind of medallions so I can just gently sear them. And I have a few blueberries in the fridge, and maybe a sort of blueberry balsamic kind of glaze to go on the pork, and maybe some mushroom risotto as well.
That's like a good plan.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody out there in virtual land. And thanks, Tony, for joining us. Megs, Rebecca.
Thank you.
It's been fun. So signing off. And until next time, this Saturday is Gewürztraminer this Saturday. So I'm looking forward to that. 4 o'clock. Hope we see you
And
there.
we'll be there.
Oh, good.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. Cheers.
Cheers.